Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel NPA Discovery. Today's story is not an easy one to tell. It is layered, uncomfortable, emotionally complex, and deeply human. We are examining the life of Priscilla Presley, a woman forever linked to one of the most powerful cultural figures in history, Elvis Presley, and the long shadow that fame, secrecy, and silence cast over her life and her family. The title of this video raises difficult questions about love, control, responsibility, and the systems that protect powerful men while asking young women, and later children, to endure quietly. This is not a video about gossip, and it is not a video about sensational blame. It is a documentary-style analysis of reported experiences, historical context, and psychological dynamics that shaped one of the most famous relationships in American pop culture. Before we begin, I want to be clear about something important. What you are about to hear includes reported claims, personal memoir accounts, and public allegations. Some involve deeply sensitive subjects. We will discuss them responsibly, critically, and without asserting guilt where facts are disputed. Our goal is understanding, not judgment. And if you value content that approaches difficult history with respect, depth, and honesty, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to keep producing thoughtful, long-form storytelling that goes beyond headlines and asks harder questions. Now let's begin at the beginning, because Priscilla Presley's story did not start with Elvis. A childhood built on absence and rewriting reality. Priscilla Presley was born Priscilla Ann Wagner in 1945, into a world already shaped by loss. Her biological father, a U.S. Navy pilot, died in a plane crash when she was still an infant. Her mother, left widowed with a newborn, remarried a few years later to Air Force officer Paul Beaulieu. From that moment on, Priscilla's life took on a defining characteristic: instability disguised as normalcy. As a military family, they moved frequently from base to base, country to country. For many military children, this produces resilience. For others, it creates something else, a deep need for belonging, approval, and emotional anchoring. There was another, quieter fracture. For years, Priscilla was told that Paul Beaulieu was her biological father. She discovered the truth accidentally, alone, as a child going through family belongings. No dramatic conversation. No emotional preparation. Just a sudden realization that part of her identity had been quietly rewritten without her consent. Psychologists often point out that early identity disruption, especially when paired with loss, can profoundly shape how someone relates to authority figures later in life. It can make affection feel conditional. It can blur boundaries. And it can make validation feel like survival. This context matters. Because when Priscilla later encountered Elvis Presley, she did not meet him as an emotionally grounded adult. She met him as a teenager still forming her sense of self. The world Elvis represented. By the late 1950s, Elvis Presley was not simply famous. He was a phenomenon. He represented rebellion, sexuality, power, and excess. He also represented something more subtle: escape. For young people, especially young women, Elvis embodied an alternate universe where rules bent, attention was intoxicating, and ordinary life felt small. When Elvis entered Priscilla's life, he did so not as a peer, but as a myth made human. That imbalance is not a moral judgment. It is a factual observation. Power imbalances do not require malicious intent to be dangerous. They only require asymmetry. A real-life parallel. This dynamic did not exist in isolation. Throughout history, powerful men have shaped younger partners' identities, often believing they were acting lovingly. From European royalty to modern celebrities, the pattern repeats: the older figure knows best, while the younger figure learns to comply. In many cases, the long-term psychological cost is only understood years later, once autonomy finally emerges. Priscilla Presley's later reflections suggest exactly that. Why this story still matters. It would be easy to dismiss all of this as a different time. But that argument collapses under scrutiny. Yes, social norms were different. But power imbalances were understood even then. Parents hesitated. Authorities questioned. And secrecy itself implies awareness that something needed hiding. The real issue is not Elvis alone. The real issue is how entire systems protected charisma over vulnerability, reputation over reality. And that system did not disappear when Elvis died. Graceland, control, and the illusion of safety. By the early 1960s, Priscilla Presley was no longer just a teenager orbiting a distant idol. She was becoming physically embedded in Elvis Presley's world, first through visits, then through relocation, and eventually through a life that revolved almost entirely around him. This transition did not happen suddenly. It unfolded gradually, through persuasion, reassurance, and promises of permanence. And as with many relationships defined by imbalance, it was framed not as confinement, but as protection. America, where power becomes normalized. When Priscilla first traveled to the United States to see Elvis, she arrived with rules negotiated by her parents. She would be chaperoned. She would write home daily. She would remain under supervision. On paper, safeguards existed. In practice, they dissolved quickly. Elvis did not meet her at the airport. She was taken to his home by staff. When she arrived, she found a party in progress, music playing, people laughing, adults moving freely through spaces she barely understood. This moment mattered more than it appears. It was Priscilla's first lesson in hierarchy. She was important enough to be invited, but not important enough to be prioritized. That dynamic would repeat for years. Psychologists often note that early exposure to inconsistent attention trains people to internalize blame. If I were better, more patient, more understanding, I wouldn't feel invisible. The makeover as identity erasure. One of the most telling moments described in Priscilla's memoir involves a physical transformation. Elvis reportedly purchased her clothing, entire wardrobes, according to his preferences. He arranged professional hair and makeup services. He commented that she was too plain without them. This was not presented as cruelty. It was presented as improvement. But identity shaping, especially during adolescence, carries long-term consequences. When external approval dictates appearance, the internal sense of self weakens. Over time, Priscilla became what Elvis wanted her to be. And in doing so, she slowly disappeared from herself. Motherhood and emotional distance. Priscilla became pregnant shortly after the wedding. Instead of joy, she felt fear. She worried what a child would mean for a relationship already strained by distance, secrecy, and insecurity. Elvis reportedly discouraged birth control earlier, while also expressing discomfort with sexual intimacy after childbirth. These conflicting messages created deep anxiety. Lisa Marie Presley was born in 1968. Both parents adored her. But parenthood did not heal the marriage. In some ways, it exposed its fractures. A quiet confession. In her memoir, Priscilla later acknowledged a brief affair during this period, an act she described not as rebellion, but as confusion and loneliness. This admission matters, not as scandal, but as evidence of emotional starvation. People do not seek connection elsewhere when they feel seen, valued, and secure. Elvis's return, and the end of balance. Elvis's 1968 comeback reignited his career. With renewed fame came renewed touring, renewed temptations, renewed distance. Affairs multiplied. Absence became routine. By the early 1970s, Priscilla and Elvis were no longer partners, they were coexisting occupants of the same myth. And Priscilla, now older and more self-aware, began to recognize the cost of staying. Awakening, collapse, and the inheritance of silence. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, something fundamental had shifted inside Priscilla Presley. She was no longer the quiet teenager waiting for permission to exist. She was a woman approaching her late 20s, a mother, and, perhaps for the first time, someone beginning to ask a dangerous question: who am I, outside of Elvis Presley? That question, once asked, could not be unasked. The moment autonomy begins. Autonomy rarely arrives as a single dramatic rebellion. More often, it creeps in through discomfort, through sleepless nights, unanswered questions, and the slow realization that love should not feel like erasure. Priscilla's awakening did not begin with anger. It began with absence. Elvis was gone more than he was home. Touring, performing, surrounded by admirers, insulated by handlers. Priscilla remained at Graceland, raising their daughter, maintaining appearances, and living within a world that revolved around someone else's schedule. She later described feeling invisible. This feeling, common among partners of highly powerful individuals, has a specific psychological weight. When your life is structured around another person's needs, your own desires begin to feel indulgent, even selfish. But emotional deprivation does not disappear just because it is inconvenient. A child in the middle. Throughout all of this, one person absorbed the emotional aftershocks without choice: Lisa Marie Presley. Born into fame, raised in instability, and surrounded by adults managing their own unprocessed pain, Lisa Marie grew up inside a legacy she did not create. Research consistently shows that children raised in high-conflict, high-publicity environments often develop hypervigilance, a heightened sensitivity to emotional shifts, danger, and abandonment. Lisa Marie's later life would reflect this pattern. Elvis's death and the freezing of time. In August 1977, Elvis Presley was found unresponsive at Graceland. He was 42 years old. The official cause of death cited cardiac failure, though years of heavy prescription drug use were widely acknowledged as contributing factors. For Priscilla, the news was devastating. Despite everything, the imbalance, the pain, the divorce, Elvis was still the central figure around which her adult life had been built. His death did not end the story. It fossilized it. From that moment on, Elvis ceased to be a man and became a monument. And monuments do not change. Life after Elvis, reinvention and residual trauma. In the years following Elvis's death, Priscilla worked to rebuild her life. She pursued acting. She achieved success on her own terms, notably in television and film. She raised Lisa Marie. She entered long-term relationships that were more balanced and less defined by fame. On the surface, this appeared to be a story of resilience. But trauma does not disappear when circumstances improve. It often re-emerges later, in unexpected forms. These are allegations, not proven facts. They have been publicly denied. They have not been adjudicated in court. But their existence demands thoughtful examination, not sensational reaction. What matters most here is not legal outcome, but pattern recognition. When children grow up in environments where boundaries are already blurred, where power is concentrated, and where silence has historically been rewarded, vulnerability increases. This does not mean Priscilla intended harm. It does not mean she was aware of everything. It does mean that systems of silence replicate themselves. Trauma, when unaddressed, tends to echo. A tragic echo, Lisa Marie Presley's death. In January 2023, Lisa Marie Presley died suddenly from complications related to prior medical procedures. She was 54 years old. Her death reignited unresolved grief, legal disputes, and public scrutiny. It also exposed how much pain had been quietly carried across generations. Mother to daughter. Partner to partner. Silence to silence. Why this story is not about villains. At this point, many people want to assign blame. That impulse is understandable, but incomplete. This story is not about one bad person. It is about unchecked power, cultural idolization, and emotional immaturity protected by fame. It is about how systems fail people long before individuals do. Breaking the silence, legacy, responsibility, and the power to choose differently. By the time the world entered the 21st century, the Presley name had become more than history. It had become a symbol of music, fame, longing, excess, and unresolved questions. For decades, Elvis Presley was frozen in cultural memory as an icon untouched by time. Priscilla Presley, by contrast, continued to live, aging, reflecting, evolving, while carrying a legacy that never truly belonged to her alone. And that difference matters. Because history is not only shaped by those who become legends. It is also shaped by those who survive them. A final empowering reflection. If there is one lesson to take from this story, it is this: power demands accountability. Silence demands examination. And love, without equality, becomes something else entirely. We cannot change the past. But we can refuse to repeat it. By listening more carefully, by questioning myths more honestly, by believing that complexity does not weaken truth, it strengthens it. Priscilla Presley's story, Lisa Marie Presley's pain, and Elvis Presley's legacy all remind us of the same essential truth: fame does not erase responsibility. Love does not excuse harm. And healing begins where silence ends. Thank you for staying with this story. If you believe thoughtful conversations like this matter, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps ensure that difficult histories are explored with depth, empathy, and integrity. Until next time, choose understanding over judgment, and courage over silence.